Here we go again, with me and my fascination for other people's jobs. It's a novelist to me, I guess. My characters have to have jobs, right? I pretty much used up all my major jobs I've had before author, caregiver, landscaper, radio host. I just have an intense curiosity about how people spend their professional lives, all the nuances of their jobs, the highs, the lows, the rewards, and the tolls that their jobs maybe take on them. The more unique and dramatic the job, the more I want to know. So today's guest fits the bill in a big way. Victor M. Sweeney is a mortician, a funeral director, and the author of Now Departing, a small town mortician on life, death, and moments in between. So keep an eye out that. He is also the host of the podcast Death and, which you will find on Spotify, Apple, and wherever podcasts are available. Victor comes to us today, I believe, from Warren, Minnesota.
That's right.
Is that right? Okay. So please welcome to the show, Victor M. Sweeney. Victor, thanks for being our fresh face.
Jonathan, thanks for having me.
So, man, I'm so curious. I have so many questions I want to ask. Let's just start at the top. I want to have a day in the life of the mortician, kind of a walkthrough. So walk us through the sort of routine protocol. I'm going to give you a scenario, and maybe you tell me how you'd handle it as a mortician from checking them in, just like through the process. So 75-year-old male dies of congestive heart failure. Body arrives 12 hours after the fact. What are we looking at? Where are we physically? Where does the work begin? What does the body look like? In his living room,
so,
in front of the TV.
Perfect. Air-conditioned room or not?
But nobody was home, so
air-conditioned or not?
Well, let's go with not. I like.
All right.
I think this ought to make things more dicey. All right, so you kind of got the idea. Those are good questions. So just to recap, 75-year-old male without air conditioning dies in front of his living room of congestive heart failure. It's 12 hours before the body arrives.
Yeah. Well, actually, so realistically, at least for me, it'd be 12 hours, and then I would be called to go to the house. So half of it, So
on
it
the starts at the house.
I would have to be the one to pick them up. And actually, I've had this happen before. The maybe not the most recent time. The one that sticks out to me was I had a gentleman pass away about that age by himself. The question I always ask is he wearing pants? Because like 50% of the time, for whatever reason, single dead guys in their house, unattended, not wearing pants. The last one I had, he wasn't wearing pants and died on the floor, kind of fell out of his chair. And it was a very dirty house. And I rolled him over and found like 72 cents in change underneath him and a flip-flop. And so I had to, put those in the inventory as we took him in. Getting him back to the funeral home then, get him on the table. I'm going to guess you're probably going to have issues with livor mortis. So that's blood settling. So just imagine from about here down, very purple. If the hands are down on the floor where they probably are, those are probably very purple. If you die face down, then you have the co-issue of facial swelling because everything will fall downward. So give a body 12 hours and you have a very purple face and a very swollen face. So those would be probably some of the issues at play. Depending on how hot it is, you might also have issues with decomposition because that starts the minute you die. So 12 hours in like a hot room.
Okay, I have a few questions. Go. First of all, like that's just such a strange. I mean, everybody knows I do nude Wednesdays, so it's. But when I sit down, I put a towel or. Sitting on a chair with no pants on is a weird choice for me. Like, I just think, walking around or laying in bed, but like sitting on a chair naked, that's an interesting one because other people might eventually sit on that chair.
If it's like your recliner, and it has like the shape of your butt and your sweaty outline, you're probably okay.
Yeah, but what if, I don't know about my guests, if you have any, but now, do you have an assistant to help you get the body? I mean, you can't just get a big body.
Like a lot of times, like up where I am, like the sheriff's deputy is there. So it'll be just two of you. And so that gets hard. That's why my back
a lot easier to
is
get a body up on us. Yeah. Victor just came from the chiropractor. He's been hauling a lot of product.
Something like that.
Do we call it product in the industry? Probably
customers, not. I think we could call it. Customers.
Okay, so now you've got him at the what, the
Yeah.
mortuary, and where the funerals happen at the funeral home, the mortuary is there too, where you do
Yeah,
your
yeah,
work, your
one and the
medical
same.
room where
So,
you're
like most funeral homes you would drive by, let's say you go drive down the road and you see a funeral home, odds are good they have what at least we in the industry call a prep room. You could call it an embalming room. Most funeral homes have one of those somewhere in the building. So mine are just attached to the back half of the building. I worked at a place in a big city where it was down in the basement, and that was way creepier. But yeah, most every funeral home has the facilities to embalm a body attached.
yeah, well, it's not let's God forbid it should go the way of the farm to table restaurant industry where we have a lot of open kitchens. I don't think
Yeah,
you
those are
kinda wanna keep
necessarily
those 2
closed.
things pretty separate to the
Yes.
public.
Yeah.
So, and then it begins. Are you tasked I mean, you're tasked with, like, figuring out the cause of death too,
No,
right?
no,
That's not
no.
just
That's
some
that
different
that's someone
forensics guy,
else's
that's
job.
you.
That'd be like a forensics examiner, a medical examiner, sometimes they're called, or a coroner. But that's not my job.
Okay, so they would do that at the
Yeah,
site of the death
usually,
then?
usually. So, like, let's say we had something like this, where you have a guy who dies alone. 12 hours goes by. Um, the medical examiner will have to release their body to me. So until they're authorized to move that person, they don't go anywhere. So usually what happens is, let's say someone finds them. So they call the ambulance, and the ambulance is going to come, pronounce time of death. Then they're going to call the coroner or the medical examiner, and they're going to look through their medical records and say, "Oh yeah, Jim had a bunch of heart problems and diabetes, and you name it." And they're going to say, "Okay, natural causes. Call the funeral home." And so that's when I'd come in.
Interesting. So they're gonna say natural causes just looking at some charts before they
Yeah,
even see the
and
body,
typically too,
provided
like
there's
like if the ambulance or if my sheriff's deputy shows up, he's gonna take a bunch of pictures, he's gonna walk around, he's gonna look everything over. So the minute there's something suspicious, something like that goes on lockdown. Uh, but more often than not,
okay,
it's
and then
very
then it doesn't
innocuous.
and in that case, you're probably not taking the body away. If it
No.
looks like something suspicious, then probably the
Yeah, well,
coroner takes it to
exactly. Yeah,
their
it goes straight to the medical
facility?
examiner.
Okay, okay. So, what's the most gruesome condition a body has arrived to you? I mean, specifically, maybe in a situation, I'm just trying to frame this as a sort of a work challenge, a situation where you've been tasked with an open casket arrangement, um, which seems like the ultimate
Yeah.
professional challenge is that a
Car okay,
body arrives to you in a condition where you're
car
like, "Hey,
crashes
you
are
sure you
tough.
wanna do an open casket?" But
Yeah, I mean, and there are times where, like, let's say you have somebody come to you and they've been dead for days and days and days. Like, there's no open casket happening there. Um, or gunshot wounds to the head, like, the let's say it's a suicide with a shotgun. Odds are good. There's nothing we're gonna see there. Um, but I'd say, like, oftentimes the ones that we can reconstruct that are very challenging are generally accidents, like things like car crashes, especially. Right? You have a bad car crash, you're going to have broken bones, you're going to have lacerations, you're going to have exsanguination, so you're going to blood everywhere. Um, but typically, I'd say once you get let's say someone dies in a car crash, once you get them back on the table and you wash them up and you have all the parts there, right? Um, Getting someone presentable while it takes a long time and is a challenge, uh, is doable, but it's all about how much time an embalmer wants to put in, right? So, like, I know of cases where someone dies a rather, I don't know, gruesome death, and the undertaker's like, "Nope, closed casket," when, like, it could have been open. Um, so a lot of it really is based on the embalmer's skill and the time they want to put in. At least for myself,
interesting. So they have I mean, they make that
pretty
j
much.
even if the client is
We wanna
like
see
even if the client is like, "Look, it's really important that we
Yeah,
want a presentation," and
yeah, it really becomes kind of a team decision because, like, let's say you had something where you have advanced decomposition, right? Where not only do you have sight, you have the issue of smell. Um, Having to explain that gently to a family is very challenging. And then you have to basically not coach them, not lead them, but basically have a discussion in which you lay it all out on the table, and they can decide, and really they have to decide that casket's staying closed. Because at the end of the day, like as an embalmer, as a funeral director, you don't want to give someone something that's going to make this worse. Like, it's already hard enough. So I had a situation
Yeah.
some years ago. I actually wrote about it in my book. Um, a gentleman passed away while on safari in Africa. And by the time we got through all the red tape and the time we got him home, he was embalmed in Namibia, um, but only really embalmed his trunk and limbs. So his face was rather desiccated. It didn't look like himself. And so while I could have said, "Hey, family, we're going to view him," it would have been honestly worse.
Okay. I think it might be instructive for the listeners and for myself right here to set up. Let's talk about like sort of rigor mortis 101, like the different stages. I don't think we're all well conversant in this, so that when you're taking us through hypotheticals, we kind of have an idea of what happens. I mean, the heart stops and, like, can you walk us
Yeah,
through just medically, like,
yeah.
the stages of rigor
So
mortis and, like, kind of a timeline so that when you say, "I didn't get the body for 8 days later," we have a
yeah,
little more of
so
an
so
idea
this
what that
is
looks like
interesting.
versus.
So rigor mortis is a little misunderstood in some ways. So when you pass away, you're all floppy. And then through the actions of ATP, sodium potassium pumps, all the anatomical stuff that is not that interesting, at least to me. What happens is basically your muscles tense up and they have no way to release because they don't move, right? And so you get these very extremely tense muscles for the first handful of hours. So you have a couple hours where you're loosey goosey, and then you tighten up with rigor mortis. And then let's say another 8 hours goes by. That'll start to wear down again, depending on the conditions, of course. Excuse me. And then you're actually gonna go all soft again. So because the muscles are actually actively decomposing, right? They're breaking themselves down. So what will happen is, let's say you go into a scene where someone's been dead for several days. No rigor mortis. They're long past that because those muscles are already starting to break down. Whereas maybe you have someone who's been dead for, again, the proverbial 12 hours we've been talking about, they still might exhibit signs of rigor mortis, stiffness, right? And we're talking not only like in the big muscles, like the biceps and the quads, right? But even, oh, excuse me, my back is just killing me. Um, Even the small muscles like the fingers. So sometimes I'll get someone in and their hands will be just rigid. And so one of the things that if you're trying to position a body is you actually have to work those muscles in order to release the rigor mortis. You actually have to move them to get them to release all that buildup. So
and there's, like, gas buildup in there,
not
right?
necessarily gas
Like,
buildup, but just the muscles are like tensed and locked, right? They'd be like,
so you're actually almost like a
yeah, yeah. You
massage
you
with.
work them out. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you move the elbows until they can move. You take those fingers and you bend them in until they're all wiggly again. Um, the one tricky little tip that I learned is when you're trying to break rigor is always bring the elbow over the chest, because that shoulder, if you don't kind of unlock that, so to speak, then it doesn't matter where your hands and arms go, they won't be in the right spot. So yeah, it's very interesting. It's like this strange calisthenics that you can do with a body in order to like get their limbs to be pliable enough to position them.
I find it fascinating because it actually sort of humanizes the death in a way that I mean, we're so desensitized by, well, I mean, media and television and movies also, but, like, I mean, I don't necessarily think this is morbid talking about this in a way that it's like, I think it helps us maybe to think about, like, this is this vessel still it's still with us until after whatever has left it, and I don't think anybody really goes into I've never heard these details before,
Well, and
calisthenics
and
and
what's interesting,
basically
yeah,
massaging the
and what's
corpse and.
interesting for me, so I'm in a small town in northern Minnesota. So most of the people that come through my door, I've been here 11 years. Most of the people that come through my door, I know. So you're essentially you're
That was
or even when you start embalming, right? You open up an artery, you open up a vein, you go down the artery to push the fluid in, which then pushes all the stagnant, coagulating blood out. But as you do that, right, you're trying to promote distribution to the extremities. So you're massaging the limbs, you're massaging the arms, you're squeezing on the fingertips to get the pooled blood out of there, so you can swap it with embalming fluid that will then preserve it and disinfect it and provide like a nicer color than purple, right? But the strange thing is that
so is the pool of blood, is that what
the
causes
liver
the
mortis, yeah,
bloating and this?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
And the thing is, though, I know these people, so in some ways,
Yeah, like it's Mr. Hooper from the
yeah,
hardware store. It's
yes,
gotta be
it's
that was actually one
it's
of my questions is
challenging,
just
but it's very nice because they are very human, right? You recognize them for who they are. It's not just some slab of meat on the table you're getting paid to, whatever, prettyify for the funeral.
that's gotta add an extra layer though. Like, I mean, certain ways, I mean, we've talked to people with, first responders and ER nurses and paramedics and people that have to face some pretty
Yeah.
grisly
Yeah.
sights
They
and
have it
things like
worse than
that. I
me.
I just gotta feel like knowing him, I mean, in a way, I can see where that makes it, maybe easier in some respects, but it's gotta add also an extra layer of emotion that is going to require, I mean, so much of this job seems like it requires a compartmentalization of emotion and technical proficiency.
Well, it's funny you say compartmentalization because I think as I've been examining this, I I've been thinking about my career in those ways because I've had people mention it before, and I think that might be true. I kind of think if there's compartments, there's only two compartments. There's like the body as a person, and the body is this thing I have to try to fix. Okay, and it's almost like a switch. You just switch. You flip the switch. So one minute you're massaging their arms and legs because like, oh, I've got a job to do. I've got to get fluid to distribute to the feet or something so they stay preserved and don't decompose. Um, and then the next minute you're putting their hands on top of each other and you see like a wedding ring and you're like, oh yes, I know the husband. Or maybe I buried the husband and did this exact same thing to him 3 years ago. So you vacillate back and forth so quickly. It's hard to say if it's a compartmental attitude, or if it's just you know where each thing belongs and you just flop between them at will.
Eh, I mean, it seems like it would help to have a certain sort of temperament. I mean, my understanding, which is just it's not really from research, just I've known a few funeral directors and things like that, and my feeling is it often tends to be like a family business. Because what I'm wondering is it takes, I mean, like when I asked a paramedic, does it take a certain sort of personality to be able to, like when you went to mortician school or whatever, do some people drop out? Do
Oh
some
yeah,
people
some do.
think, okay, so, like, I mean, do you think at a higher rate than other jobs? I mean, do you think that, like,
You
does it
know,
do you go into this thinking, "I have this I think I'm the person that can flip that switch," because there's some people, like, I'm not very good at flipping switches. I actually end up being pretty good in crisis situations, but sometimes where it comes to emotions versus, the
mhm.
stiff or the
Yep,
stiff on
yep,
the
yep.
slab versus the knowing my neighbors, I could see that being kind of difficult for me to navigate just mentally. It seems like it does require a certain, maybe not ingrained personality traits, but develop skills or whatever. So,
Yeah,
like,
I kinda
paramedic.
yeah, I kinda think you either I tell this to students because they ask like, "Well, how do I do what you do?" I have a lot of students reaching out to me. And usually what I tell them is like, "Well, you either have it or you don't." You probably half of what you need, you probably already have inside you. You have whatever the certain temperament is. So yeah, is it a temperament that really vacillates wildly? Are you, like I don't know if funeral directors are naturally very phlegmatic. Um, but I tend to think that that were usually pretty positive people. Like you don't meet too many really dour funeral directors. I know that's like a trope, but
Yes,
every funeral
yes.
director I've ever met is like quite gregarious and generally pretty funny. And not in like the weird dark gallows humor way, but just like goofy, silly. Don't really take things too seriously. Um, and I don't know if that develops because you work around death all the time, but I kind of think you have it, and so you're maybe more naturally suited to handling the big heavy things because you realize like it's all part of the whole. Like, oh yes, it's part of living. You can still laugh and cry in the same breath. And the people who realize that I think do really well in the industry.
Yeah, well, and your job is such a dichotomy, it seems, because on the part of it, it's very clinical. You're dealing with bodies. You gotta, I don't know, you have to prepare a body and do all these the coercing of
Yeah.
the body and the coaxing, as you said, and moving fluids around and all that. But at the same time, you have to face bereaved families
Yeah,
daily.
it's two it's
You're,
two
you're working
very
on
it's two
both.
very different jobs. It's kind of
Right, and it seems like a part of where you develop the personality and the gregarity probably comes not so much from the clinical part, but,
right.
like, having to put a face on it to deal with the
Yeah, I in my book I wrote it's a dichotomy in search of a balance. Because yeah, you have like the two great things. You have life and death, and they're sitting in front of you every day. You have the dead body over here, and you have the family over here, right? And the family's really living, and the dead body's real dead. So you've got those two things that you're balancing. You've got um, the forward-facing part of the job, which is pure service industry job, doing what people tell you to do. And then you have the backward facing part of the job, which is art and science, and also kind of macabre. Yeah, so it's the whole industry, my whole world. You could just split down the middle, and it's just balancing those two things is really the trick.
so, I often dovetail into literature with all my subjects, and it seems like a pretty short list of mortician, a short small canon of literature, clear. Have you read The Loved One by Evelyn
Yeah,
Waugh?
great book, very funny.
Yeah, great book, because you mentioned the word art and, the sort of conceit of this book, which is a
Yes,
comedy,
yeah,
which is already a great
yeah. It's a
conceit, right?
satire.
Because
Yeah,
it's not a naturally funny subject, but well, you did use the word art, and there is an art just as there is for a stylist or a makeup
yeah,
person or some but you're dealing with more challenges. I mean, stylists and makeup persons might have to make a relatively unattractive person look more
yeah.
attractive or a really attractive person look more unattractive. But, like, I'm just really curious about whether and part of that comes from, just it's for the listeners, the book, The Loved One, a mortician is in love with his assistant and he prepares the bodies to please her. Like when he puts a certain sort of smile or a wry look on her face, it's meant to communicate something to the assistant. But there's this idea that the body is the canvas, and that's got to be clearly
Well,
that's a big part of your
it
job. And you
is.
use the
It
word
is. I
art.
because I've talked with other people about this that people a sculptor works in the medium of clay, a painter works in the medium of oils. I work in the medium of dead human flesh. Um and here's the thing about it. I think when you're making art, if you can call embalming art, which it is, it's half art and half science, I guess. But when you're doing the art, I tend to think that the best embalmers are also the best at working with the living as well. And that's not always true. But think about this. So if I'm trying to get someone's smile just right, let's say, not a cheesy smile, but whatever that perfect expression is, um, you have to look at a lot.
It wasn't my grandmother, dude. It was just this
See,
sneering
and that
rictus. It was
sucks.
like,
Yeah, you don't want the
I mean,
rictus grin
yeah.
because here's the thing: like you have to look at a lot of living people's faces in order to know how to make a dead person's face look proper.
Do you ask for
Oh
pictures?
yes, oh yeah. If I don't know them,
Okay.
sure. Sometimes
This is really
yeah,
interesting.
and so
This is a really interesting
and
artistic
the thing is,
process.
sometimes you don't get either. So there have been cases where I do not know the person. I have not received a picture, but what's kind of interesting is I had a situation just recently where I was getting a lady ready, and her daughter was at the deathbed prior to that, right? So I'm at the nursing home around the deathbed. I see the daughter. I start getting mom ready, and mom dies with her mouth open and her eyes open, looks not all that human. But once you start getting a person ready and you close their eyes and you start positioning their mouth, all of a sudden I saw the daughter right before me on the table. And I go, oh, I know what mom looks like. I just saw her daughter. And now if I was face blind, super hard job because if I don't see the daughter, I can't see the daughter and the mom and vice versa. Um, so it really is interesting. And the face kind of takes its natural form. I'm a big believer in that, like, the face you make will stick. When your mom told you that, don't make that face, it'll stay that way. Um, and that seems to be very much the case with the dead as well.
Well, I mean, we see it in laugh lines
Yeah,
and
they find
crow's
no,
feet
they
and
find their place. So, like, excuse me. I had a gentleman pass away the other day who was like an extremely cranky gentleman known for being this way. So when I got him ready, now I could have forced, a little quirk of a smile, but I was like, there's no way. That'd be disingenuous. So I put, like, just the hint of a frown, and it was so funny because then when his nieces and nephews came, they're like, "Oh yeah, there he is!" Like they could see him, and
that's it. That was a see now that you're a good artist because that was a leap. That you know
yeah,
what I mean? Because I would think intuitively everyone's gonna like just like the makeup or the stylist, come in and it's like, "You gotta make me look my best." But I think you're onto something with keeping the personality and the so clearly, it's so interesting to for me, again, to frame this as artistic because we don't hesitate to call a hairstylist or a makeup person, but then when we're talking about
yeah.
people are liable to scoff at this
Yeah, we
artistic,
call
but
it
there
we
are,
call it
like
mortuary science, that's like my degree is mortuary science, but I really do find it's anything but. The science is the foundation, but the art is where it's fun.
yeah, the body preparation and the draining and the fluids and that stuff, there's the science, but so much of it is like the funeral director part of it, which ties more into the presentation of the body. And I mean, I know there's mortician conventions. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
there's conventions for every profession,
Yeah.
those hotel banquet hall affairs with lanyards and such. So I'm guessing you know of a lot of other morticians, personally and professionally. Is there people that are kind of known for their flair, for having like a particularly slick or unique style in their presentations? Do people have styles? Like you've described to me what your style is. You're going for, "This is what I think the person was in life. I'm gonna try to make that." But,
Oh, yeah, going
is there maybe people that
yeah,
kinda go a little too
doing
far?
doing,
Like,
like, full going out makeup.
I wanna make everybody look like Carol Channing or
Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah, I'm loath to talk too much about other professionals, but I know that there was a funeral home somewhere down south that had a reality TV show, and we're doing, like, really outlandish services. So things like extreme embalming, where they'd embalm someone, like, standing up or in their, like, gaming chair or something, and just really over the top stuff, which is fun to watch. It's exciting things, but, um, you know, that much flair is not really for me.
but that's ultimately, isn't that going to be I mean, you draw your lines as an artistic and what you're willing to do. It's like my editor says, "Hey, write me a splashy thriller." I'm like, "That's not what I do." But, like, so clearly the people on the reality show, the decisions must have been coming from the bereaved in the family, like, "I
I
want him sitting
guess.
in his gaming chair."
I guess. Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, every undertaker, what you're selling a family isn't necessarily the casket. Like, you're selling yourself. Your facilities, while important, aren't that important. And really what you're selling is your time and your attention and your skill. And so, where that falls in the spectrum of outlandish to modest, that, like, we could debate about that. That's probably the matter of art. Um, but yeah, it's all about selling yourself, I think. Is that
That's interesting. Well, yeah, it's gonna take some interpersonal skills. It's gonna be about the experience, just as it is with
Yeah.
medical professionals sometimes, and I'm actually really generally about 80% of the time just like, "Why is this guy a doctor? This guy's got the worst bedside manner." Like, m the funeral directors I know, which are 2 besides you, both have very they're just disarming personalities, good interpersonal social skills. Unlike what you mentioned, the trope of this sort
Yeah,
of morbid
yeah.
spider eating skinny guy out of a Victorian novel or something. But back to the art thing is that you're dealing with some top down mandates. Like they may want Mr. Hooper smiling, even though you kind of get that he's really that's
Oh
not who he
yeah,
is. But
you get that. No, no, no. I get that too. Even on small things. Like I got a woman ready, I don't know, last week, let's say. And the family's like, "Red lipstick, Victor." And you get it on and you're like, this is not her color. Like this just looking at everything about her, at what she's wearing, like red goes with nothing that we've got going on here. But sometimes, you just bite your tongue and you do it, and the family's like, "Oh, look at her red lipstick." So it's yeah, it's kind of a trade off. It's if the whole career is a balancing act, that's like just one more aspect to balance. Is like your wishes as the undertaker, their wishes as the family, maybe even the third thing that you juggle, which is the deceased's wishes. That's always the really tricky one because you have someone that dies and they either want the moon, which you cannot attain, or they're like, "Hey, can you just throw me in the trash?" And I feel like families
yeah,
have
I don't
trouble with
want to get.
with that kind of directive,
I
you
mean,
know?
sometimes a body, I mean, especially an accident, it's got to arrive to you in pieces, right? I mean, like not
Oh yes.
all intact. And at that point, it's like somebody's just got to say, listen, there can't be an open casket. The body is in pieces. Or is there ever a situation where people, as clients, are putting unreasonable, like, set those bones, put them back together. We want them to look as whole as possible. Is there
Yeah,
ever
I
a
mean,
point where you just
I think you do what you can. So some years ago, I had a person put a shotgun in their mouth, and all that was left were it was like some of the jaw and part of the skull. Not a whole lot else. And so the family, they wanted to see him, and I was like, well, there's nothing to see. It's most of his head is inside his house somewhere. And so what we did there is I got him dressed. I embalmed him, got him dressed, and then put him in a body bag, but left his arm out, and his parents could come hold his hand. And so that's the kind of compromise that I think you can work with. Because too, I think when the bereaved are with you, while they may not be at their best, like they're at their most human. Like the walls are down, the guards are down, um, and I think they do well to understand that you're there to help. Because really, who else is going to do it? Who else is going to put their kid back together as best he can? And so I do think families like, while having a lot of struggles, maybe with their own family members and with themselves, I think a lot of the times, at least where I'm at, they're very open with the professionals, because you know, they know you don't want, like, they know I don't want to see that. I've looked at it all close enough to tell them that it's not great, and so they're usually pretty generous with someone like me.
it's gotta be harder to do a child, right? Or are you just so trained at being able to separate,
No, kids is
flip
where
that
that falls
switch?
short. I can wax eloquent about flipping the switch and having two different compartments and balancing it. Kids, it's the worst. Um, some time ago, I have four kids, and some time
I was gonna
ago,
ask.
yeah, some time ago, I had a fetal death that was the same exact gestational age as my last kid. So like same around the same birthday, right? So this is a 20-week-old baby, in utero. And so it's, you can hold it in two hands, tiny little guy. And it's the same exact size as the one that's still growing and living in my wife. And so that gets really hard. I mean, and I
Mhm.
sat down and just cried with the parents because I'm not that far off. Like I'm not outside of their shoes. Like in some ways I'm I'm not in their shoes, but I'm with them. I mean, I also held their dead baby, right? I also packed him with cotton and put embalming fluid on him so he wouldn't start to disintegrate before we were able to bury him. I took his tiny little fingerprints. Uh, so we're all in the same boat with kids. And even my boss, whose kids are now grown, they're my age. Um, he struggles with kids because he's been there, right? He's had little kids. And you do it you do it I'm very grateful about this. You do it infrequently enough that it doesn't become commonplace and it hurts. Um, but I say I'm grateful because if I had to deal with that every week, I mean, it'd almost kill you because you pull yourselves out, especially for the families of kids. You give them everything you got, and and that gets really, really hard. But also at the end of it, it's very interesting because you've walked so far together and you've tended their son or their daughter, uh, that you do kind of become friends. And so it's weird because you see each other and the family knows you because they had to bury their kid. Um,
And
but
interestingly, you
you have
may
these
or may not
bonds.
have known their child before they died, but
Right,
ultimately
yeah.
you
Oh,
did
almost
know them.
never.
Yeah.
Almost never. I mean, let me be honest, Jonathan. My demographic is like 70 to 80-year-olds. Those are the people that are coming to a lot of the funerals.
Mine too. I
Yeah,
have the
yeah,
same demo.
yeah. And so like I don't know a lot of the young families. I don't know a lot of the kids. Um, but I think that's all the more tragic because they're, in some ways like now you will really never get to. And it's hard. Kids are hard. I mean, this is not the way things ought to be, or at least as we perceive it.
You bring up an interesting point, and this is a very subtle nuance of your job on the interpersonal level, which is that when we've talked to first responders and people like I'm thinking of my conversation with Matt Richtel, and he's explaining how in situations where life is on the line, where it's a life or death situation, people do not want somebody who's emotionally involved at all. They want because they're emotionally falling apart, they need somebody who's just, like, almost robotic. But this becomes different once we've already crossed the line of death, and I would seem to me like you mentioned that you will cry sometimes with the client, especially with the children, and I have to f see I have to feel like that's important. Like, I mean, that would be in that situation, that is a comfort to, like, know that there's empathy. It's the opposite of what Matt was describing, where you want in when you're on this side of the life or death continuum, you want somebody who's just, like, gonna handle it, no emotional involvement, but once you pass, it seems like, for their experience, like at that point, it would be important for them to see the person that's tending to the body of their beloved child to not just be a shell of a human being, to be an empathic and somehow as a parent, you c would I would I'm just trying to imagine myself in that situation if the funeral director started to cry with me, and I would feel like, "Okay, we chose the right guy."
Yeah, and that's hard because I told the family of my situation that I have a baby growing of the same age that yours has died. They know this. Um, but also there is something about being strong when you have to be strong. So if we're gonna just talk about the balancing act, when I called that family for the first time and they said, "Oh well, I don't know, we're just gonna cremate," and I had to stop them and be like, "Hey, just so you know, I don't charge anything, so we can do whatever you want." And they kind of took a step back, and you said, and then I told them further that, especially with, so I don't know if you know this about cremation. So cremation renders you to only skeletal remains. Okay, So only the bones that are all charred up and then ground up into dust, those are ashes. So how much skeletal remain does a preborn baby leave? Almost none. And so I told I told the mom this, right? Who's still in the hospital. I'm in the basement of the morgue making this phone call to her. Because I couldn't go up to the room. It was during COVID. And I'm making a phone call from the basement of the same building. And my comment to her was, "You've spent all this time growing your boy. Like, that body is all yours. So why don't we keep them all together and put them in the ground where your grandparents are?" And so, yeah, you can't cry at those moments. You have to be terribly tough. Um, or situations where you walk into any deathbed you walk into. I think if the family's there, they're looking for a little bit of leadership in a time where things are really challenging. And so, yeah, you're both open, but you're also steadfast, if that makes sense. And I don't know. When I talk with students about this or other professionals, it's like, how do you teach that? I don't know. I don't know how you teach that except to be dumb and stubborn like me and find yourself in this job and then just throw yourself into that situation again and again and again. And by the time you've done it 100 times, you'll know where the balance is. I was actually just talking to a midwife last week. Um, she came to a funeral of mine, and she took me aside and we were chit-chatting, and she goes, "Oh, there's a lot of overlap in my world and yours." Because she drives out in the middle of the night, except instead of going to get a dead body, she goes to help a mother deliver a baby at home. So she read my book and she came and she's like, "There was this wonderful overlap." And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "How do I know what to do when I walk into a room. Like, how do you know what to do when a mother's about to give birth?" And she's like, "Well, once you've done it enough, you know the things that work and the things that don't. And sometimes you put your foot in your mouth, right? Sometimes you look dumb." I've walked into a room with a grieving family and said, "Hey, how's it going?" Right? The answer is shitty. Clearly, sometimes you put your foot in your mouth. But on the whole, it's very worth doing.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate your candor and your emotional vulnerability about this because this is very easily could be a subject that I could deal with as a host sort of callously and talk about like there's some obvious I've heard some of the questions you've had to field on your
Oh, yeah.
podcast and I'm like, I'm just kind of like, really? You're going to ask that? And I might have one or two of those. I did want to, I got several line of questioning here I still want to pursue, but I kind of, just because I'm a little obsessed with convention culture, I want to go back to the hotel banquet hall with you and the other morticians at the hotel bar. Like, what shape do those conversations take? And are you guys talking more about, like, just the fiscal responsibilities of running a funeral home, or
Yeah.
things are slow
Yeah,
since the pandemic? Are you talking about bodies? Where like, talk to me.
I haven't gone to too many. I don't know. I like my conventional wisdom would say if I have free time, I'm not gonna go spend it with a bunch of other undertakers. But, um, the ones that I have gone to are kind of fun, because you do talk about business, right? What's working, what's selling, what's not selling, um, how are your families, are they happy? What could you provide that maybe you don't know about yet, right? So it's good to talk to the professionals. Um, Later in the evening, you get to the war stories, right? So you talk about, "Oh, I had this one time that XYZ happened." And but what's interesting is when you do it, like one of my good friends is an undertaker, and we talk pretty regularly, and inevitably we'll call the other when the Schmidt hits the fan. When things are going real crazy, we'll call the other, you won't believe what just happened to me, right? Um, and it's not necessarily to sensationalize it. It is maybe a little bit because it is kind of fun to hear things that are out of your normal everyday. But especially between professionals, the follow-up question is like, "Okay, so how did you deal with it?" Because that's always the more interesting question. I had a situation where I had an organ donor. And this woman had donated some organs, but for whatever reason, so she was cut open. But for whatever reason, they left the heart. And where her neck was, there were all these different port lines, and so I knew it was just going to be a mess in there. And so I actually like had my elbow in her abdominal cavity and her heart in my hand, and was embalming up the heart to go into the head and the extremities. And like I've never done anything like that before. That's insane, right? So I call my friend Lewis, and Lewis is like, "Oh, that's crazy. How'd you do it?" Because inevitably something like that's going to happen to him, and now you have in your back pocket somebody else's experience that you can kind of use to figure out along the way.
Knowing how the human mind works, and just knowing my own professional does the work ever give you nightmares? It must. I mean, our daily lives.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. So yes and no, because I don't have a dead body dream every night. A lot of nights I do. And almost always though when
interesting.
I
So it
find a
is
dead
pretty common.
oh yeah, all the time. But I'll find a dead body and it's always, so what do I do now? How do I get him out of, the top of a jungle gym or wherever wherever they happen to be in my weird dream? It's always like it's a work dream. So you have work dreams about, I don't know, radio, podcasts. You have
Well,
work dreams.
writing. I have writing dreams. I have dreams where I'm writing in my dreams and I wake up out of a sleep and I write it down and I'm like, that doesn't make a bit of fucking sense. Like in the
Yeah,
dream, I just had a breakthrough in my novel and then it's like, no.
was not. Yeah. Yeah. So I have the
So
same
that's
thing. I have work
interesting. That
dreams
makes sense to me. So you're like
and they're
tasked with there's
practical.
a body in a jungle gym and I've got to get that down. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Down the slide
That
is
was
the
actually
answer.
one of your dreams.
Yeah. Yeah. Down the slide.
Ultimately, what did draw you to what at what point did you decide like I'm gonna do this work? This isn't a family business for
No,
you.
not for me. Um, no, there's a long story and a short story, but the long story I wrote about in my book, the short story is this, is that I'm a Catholic. I always wanted to be a priest. And when I discerned out of that, I was left with the big question of now what? Because that's basically where I thought my life was heading. And so then I had to figure out,
Interesting.
like, what am I going to do that scratches the itch, so to speak? What am I going to do that is helpful to people? What am I going to do that has this pastoral aspect to it? And then what am I going to do that isn't, I don't know. I didn't want to work a job in which I was just a cog in the machine. You know what I mean? Where you're just, I don't know. Even if you're working a big high level executive job, like you're just making a thingamajig for someone else to use, like a faceless someone. And I
Right.
didn't,
The
I
the
did,
buck kind of stops with you, in other
yeah,
words.
yeah. So like here I am. Um, I get to work with my hands, which I like quite a bit. I get to meet with people and counsel them in a certain respect. Like I'm a minister of a sort. Um, I make enough money to feed my family, so that's nice. Uh, and then two, there's just the aspect, like you say, the buck stops with me, that I have a great deal of agency over how I spend my time
Yeah.
and what I do with it, and how I want to operate. So, for instance, I had a funeral last week where, like, I knew money was tight. Cool, we're gonna cut corners. I'm gonna give you a discount. We're gonna do what we need to do to like make the thing right. And you don't get to do that when you're just some, you know, number or some, like I said, some cog. You're just turning profit for somebody else. At least here I can do what I think is right and do something that I think is impactful down the generations. Right? If I make grandma look really, really good and her grandkids are like, I remember, unlike you, right? Her grandkids say, oh, I remember seeing grandma and it was beautiful. Well, that just changes the way that they think about death for the rest of their lives. And I think that's pretty dang noble.
Yeah, and, it's not that far off from priest. I mean, you're still dealing with, there's still some guidance there, guiding people
And there's a hell of a lot of
realm or
mystery.
whatever. What you talked about family and how families deal with it, and just practically speaking, we ask this of other people with other professions because there's TV and then there's the real world. Like what did 6 Feet Under get right and what did they get wrong?
Um, I don't know. They break a lot of funeral and OSHA rules on 6 Feet Under. Like I remember I didn't watch the whole series because it's more fun to escape into a world of fantasy than it is a world that like I work in. Uh,
Yeah.
but so I remember once like one of the sons went to pick up a body, then stopped at at the bar for a drink and left the body in the back, and they got all hot and like I, I boy, if that ever happened, I would just want to curl up and die, or or like they have the vignettes where they're kind of like talking to the dead, and I've never, while I might know the person, I don't kind of anthropomorphize isn't the right word because they are anthropomorphic, but you know what I mean. There's like I don't ever put on what I think Sylvester's favorite polka music is as I'm embalming him. Like I'm just doing my thing. I'll connect with him when I talk with the family, not in this weird esoteric way.
Yeah. Now, I gotta ask one that I don't wanna ask, but I really do ask because I'm genuinely curious. I'm not just doing this to be Howard Stern or something, but, like, do bodies ever die with erections?
No, they don't. At least, or maybe if they've died with an erection, but by the time they get to me, it's long gone.
Interesting, because you would think that that would because we talk about stiffness and rigor mortis, I would
Yeah.
think maybe at least it would
Well,
hang
okay, but
around
but
for a while.
but is the penis a muscle? No, it's spongy tissue, right? It's spongy tissue. You have nerves, you have blood flow, but you've got to have blood flow to have an erection. So if you're dead, no blood flow. Never thought you'd be talking about boners with a mortician.
So, well, that's I'm kinda relieved you answered that because then I didn't have to ask the follow-up question, like, what do you do with that? I really I okay. So, I guess the ultimate question to ask you, having experienced everything you have, gone through everything you have, everything you know about death and how do you wanna go? Do you wanna be embalmed and presented, provided you die of somewhat natural causes, do you wanna be embalmed and presented in a casket and so forth, or do you wanna be cremated? I mean, that's kind of the ultimate
Yeah.
question for me is
No,
like,
I'll tell you what. I would like to be embalmed. Like if I could lay on the very same table that I've worked on all these years, I'd be very honored. And hopefully it'd be someone that's embalming me that I know, because I think that's been important to me. So that'd be kind of nice if they knew me. And I'd want my family to come, and I'd want my wife and my kids and my grandkids to see me. And then I'd like them to close the lid, and we'd have a mass in my Polish Catholic church that I go to, and they'd bury me here in my little town. Just put me right next to all the other caskets I put in the ground. That's what I'd like.
nice. Would you do you have a referral? Do you have somebody in mind, a friend or associate that you would like to be the person to
If
do your final preparation?
I do. It'd be my friend Lewis that I talked about. He lives 5 hours away, but I think he'd come up if someone asked.
Well, if he's your friend, I think I
Yeah,
would hope so.
yeah. It'd be. I mean, and this here's the thing. Here's the thing. I get very jealous. I have friends that are carpenters, right? And if you're a carpenter, you can like build onto your house whenever you want. You can fix stuff. You're handy, right? I have a trade too. The best I can do is bury my family well. I don't get a lot of other bonuses. If my wife dies, well, the funeral's free, but that sucks. So yeah, pretty much every other trade has a leg up on someone like me.
Well, I don't know about writing. I know I'm useless. My friend, but I try to barter. It's like, how about you build me a bunkhouse and I'll write you a
A
letter.
calm.
I mean, I don't really. Sometimes I feel like I have no skills. Oh
I'm right
man,
there
this has
with you,
been
brother.
fun. He is Victor M. Sweeney. Check out his book, Now Departing, A Small Town Mortician on Life, Death, and the Moments in Between. Victor, thanks a bunch for being our fresh face in hell this week.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Take care.